Hi, welcome to my channel. And shalom, by the way. So I wanted to pick up where we left off last week when we were discussing the giants and the fact that there are distinctly two seeds that exist on this planet. And this is why in the book of Leviticus, the Most High had instructed our people, our ancestors, the Israelites, not to mix with unlike seed, and we were not supposed to marry the other nations and only our own people. The reason for that is because there was a lot of, from the time of Noah, genetic corruption that occurred, and actually even prior to that. But the main event that we're going to cover is the event of the Watchers, known as the fallen angels, and it was documented, as I had mentioned, in several aspects of biblical, history in the scriptures, starting with Genesis chapter 6 verse 3, which I covered and touched on last week. Also in the book of Enoch, it is documented in chapter 6 of Enoch, and it is also mentioned in the book of Jubilees, which is another book that was removed, and I'm going to read it here. It says, and this is chapter 5. Now this is the actual, you can find this online. This is the book of Jubilees. It's actually translated from the Ethiopic version, which is probably one of the better translations. On page 18, chapter 5, it says, "And it happened when the sons of the children of men commenced to increase over the face of the whole earth, and daughters were born to them, that the angels of the Most High saw them in 1 year of this Jubilee, and they were beautiful to look upon, and they took unto themselves wives from all of them, whomever they chose, and they bore them sons, and these were giants." So as you can see, it's also documented there. Now, there's additional scripture in the scriptures. There's additional evidence of these events that took place. First of all, the son of David, our brother, when he came into the world, he was trying to teach our people what had happened from the beginning of creation, and that there was genetic corruption, upon the earth. And how do we know this? Well, I'm going to refer to the book of Matthew, chapter 13. There were several parables that the son of David, notice I don't say Jesus, okay, and there's a reason for that, and I'll cover that in another lecture. But the son of David, okay, what he was teaching our people, he taught in several different parables, but it was the same story, and that is the story of the genetic corruption that occurred in the beginning, from the beginning of creation, really, and especially during the time of the flood. One of the many parables was what is known as, they call it the parable of the terrace, and also it's known as the parable of the darnel. And of course there were other parables that essentially told the same story: parable of the mustard seed, the leaven, parable of the leaven, the parable of the net, just to name a few, even the parable of the sower, which is really one of my favorite parables. And I never understood all these years what it meant until I really began to start learning the ancient language of our people and began to really, through the Most High, uncover the truth. So we're going to talk about, again, it's documented in the scriptures in the parables. And this is why our brother, the son of David, spoke to our people in parables, because he was telling them the same story. And it says, chapter 13, verse 24, in the parable of the terrace, which is also known in some of the translations as the parable of the wheat, it says, "The son of David presented another parable to them, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, then the tares became evident also. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No, for while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow them to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, First gather up the tares and bind them in the bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. So we're going to start right there, and then we're going to go down to verse 36, and it explains this parable. And it says, "Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, 'Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field.' And he said, 'The one who sows the good seed is the Son, not the Son of Man.'" Okay, this is what they say in their translations. What it initially said was the son of Adam. Okay, "And the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom," again, sons of Adam, "and the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with the fire, so shall it be at the end of the age." Okay, "The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire." Okay, so we're going to stop right there. And what it says here, this is really important. "In all these things, the Son of David spoke to the crowds in parables, and he did not speak to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophet. 'I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the foundation of the world.'" So he was talking to them and speaking to them about things that were hidden since the time of creation. This all began with creation, okay? The reason why it says that the weeds were, and who planted the weeds was the evil one, the enemy, it was Satan, is because it didn't begin with the watchers in the book of Enoch. It actually began in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, verse 15, with the serpent that was in the garden. So it wasn't just the watchers. The actual first angel, this all started with one angel, and the first angel was that began corrupting and tampering with the Most High's creation, and corrupting humanity, was Satan, when he beguiled Eve. And it says it in the scriptures, and Paul stated that Satan beguiled Eve. Okay, you don't beguile a piece of fruit. Okay, they use the narrative, the piece of fruit, because they're covering up, again, because they have changed the translation. And remember, they have added they made their own alterations, because they didn't want our people, especially, let alone their own people, to know the truth, because it exposes them for what they really are, the wicked ones in the world of Christianity, and what they really represent, who they are, and where they descend from. So they covered up the story in Genesis in chapter 3 that says that Eve was tempted by a serpent and ate forbidden fruit from the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, but that there was no tree of fruit. There was no fruit tree, essentially. What that tree was Lucifer in the garden. Okay, and what he did was he seduced Eve. He beguiled her, and he impregnated her, and she bore his firstborn, which was Cain. Okay, and that's why Cain, was evil, and he slew his brother. Slew his brother Abel. Okay, so, but it all started with him, and his brothers, known as the Watchers, the fallen angels, have followed suit, and he pretty much was part of that as well, as I had mentioned last week in my first lecture. So we're going to continue here and discuss this a little bit further to understand, what does tares mean, this word tares. So if we look up the word tares, it says, because all of this is interrelated, okay? It says, from a biblical standpoint, it's a noxious weed, probably the darnel. So what is a darnel? Okay, so if you look it up in the dictionary, the darnel, it says that it is a species of ryegrass known as Lalium temulentum, often found in wheat fields, and often host to a fungus intoxicating to humans and animals. Okay, it's various species of Lalium, especially as a weed, in wheat fields. That's why, and it's also known as poison. It's a poisonous, essentially poisonous weeds. Okay, poison darnel. Synonyms. Okay, that's what this Lalium tumulentum is. Now, if you look it further, if you look up darnel in a dictionary, it says any several grasses of genus Lalium that grows as weeds in grain fields in Europe and Asia. You notice that? In Europe and Asia, this is where these weeds are grown. That's why the parable is also known as the parable of the weeds. But why is this significant that they call it also the darnel, and there's these weeds that grow in Europe and Asia? It's because it's all tied into what it really means. So I want to cover that, and we're going to talk about that right here. So it begins with Neanderthal. So if you look up Neanderthal, okay, now this is something they discovered about the origins of the Neanderthal. Now they found these bones like back in what, the 1900s in Heidelberg, Germany. Or I'm sorry, I'm actually confusing this with the other remains that they found. But it was discovered. They discovered these remains, I believe, somewhere around the 1800s. They found skulls around the 19th century, mid-19th century. But what's interesting is the genetic research that they have done was only 5 years ago when they uncovered all of this new evidence. So it says the first humans with Proto-Neanderthal traits are believed to have existed in Eurasia, that's Europe and Asia, as early as 350,000 to 600,000 years ago. Okay, now that's very, very interesting. It says comparison of the DNA of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens suggests that they diverged from a common ancestor between 350,000 and 400,000 years ago. This ancestor was probably Homo heidelbergensis. Now, why is that important? Okay, this is really important. If you look up Homo heidelbergensis, okay, Homo heidelbergensis is an extinct species of genus Homo, which lived in Africa, Europe, and Western Asia about 600 to 200,000 years ago. And they found the first remains were discovered near Heidelberg, Germany in 1907. But it says Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern humans, which were known as Homo sapiens, are all descended from Heidelbergensis between 300,000 and 400,000 years ago. Okay, an ancestral group of Heidelbergensis became independent of others shortly after they had left Africa. So they migrated. But it says one group branched northwest into Europe and West Asia and eventually evolved into Neanderthals. Now, why is this all important? Well, we scroll down. It says, we start talking about the size of the species. It says male Heidelbergensis averaged about 5'9", feet tall, and females averaged about 5'2" feet tall. So that's pretty normal height. But here's where it gets interesting. It also says, according to Lee R. Berger of the University of Witwatersrand, numerous fossil bones indicate some populations of Heidelbergensis were giants, routinely over 7 feet tall. Okay, that's really important. Inhabited South Africa between 500 and 300,000 years ago. So they were over 7 feet tall. Okay, and remember, so some of the populations were giants. Okay, so they were evolving. Okay, this Heidelbergensis species evolved, migrated over to Europe, and remember, it says Neanderthals and Denisovans. Okay, and even modern humans. Now that term modern human is very interesting because that's the term they tend to use. They're talking about Europeans today. Okay, or they're not talking about all humans. They're talking about modern. When they say modern, they're talking about Europeans. Are all descended from Heidelbergensis. Now, this is really important to understand, because when we look at Neanderthals, it says Neanderthals was a species of humans in genus Homo that became extinct between 41,000 and 39,000 years ago. Okay, they're closely related to modern humans, different in DNA by just about 0.12%. Remains left by Neanderthals include bone and stone tools, which are found in Eurasia, from Western Europe to Central and Northern Asia in the Middle East. So, we're going to talk about why that's significant, okay? And I'm actually going to show a video. We're going to pick this up and actually do a third series on this next week. And I want to show you a video to explain why this is relative and connected with that parable that we just covered in the book of Matthew. So we're going to stop right there. Thanks for tuning in. Sit tight. And may the Most High bless.